Hi, everyone. So today I'm going to talk a bit about collaborative software design and how to facilitate the decisions that you have to make when you're doing domain modeling. So my name is Gien Verschatse. I work for a company called Aertling, and I help customers build and design socio-technical systems. And to start off, I want to talk about Big Screen. So Big Screen is a cinema chain that has over 80 theaters all across the world. And so they use software in this company, as many other companies do these days, to actually perform their business. So they sell tickets online. They use it to schedule movies. So there's internal and external software. And they have gathered a lot of information. And what they want to do now is actually use that information, sort of to tap into it. So they want to extend the software system. But there's just, one problem with that. And that is that, the software system is 12 years old. And somewhere along the way, this sort of has turned into unclear boundaries. And we often refer to that as a big ball of mud. And so they were trying to do this, but the features that they wanted either took a very long time to actually implement, or it was not possible at all. And this was causing a lot of frustrations for the business because they wanted to do this, and the software department just kept saying no. But this was also frustrating for the software developers because they want to do a good job and they had to say no. And it made them feel like they couldn't do that job or they couldn't do a good job. So it was frustrating for everyone. And they were like, okay, we need a solution for this. We're going to redesign the system. We're going to get that modularity back into the system. That is our goal. And they were wondering, like, how are we going to do that? And this is sort of what they hoped to achieve, right? Again, not a very elaborate design yet, but just clear boundaries with good communication between them. And they also wanted to prevent this from happening again, right? They didn't want to get back into that situation where they had to say no. So that was the second goal, right? Redesign and prevent this. And they were going to collaborate more with the business to actually understand what it was all about so that they could reach those two goals. And while they were researching this on how to do this, they came across this thing called collaborative modeling. And they're like, hey, this sounds really good. We can do this with the business. Let's check out what it is. And here you go, a very boring definition of what collaborative modeling actually is. So it is a visualization technique to analyze complex and conflict-laden decision-making, blah, 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 blah. Right? The important thing is that it's conflict-laden and you create a shared understanding, and that is the purpose of using it. And they did some research and they discovered that, hey, this isn't something actually, specific to software. They have been doing this for a very long time in other industries as well. For example, the water resource management, where you have to decide who can use which resource and how much you can use of that water, has been using collaborative modeling to make the policies and make the decisions at government level so that it works out for everyone. So how do we use this in software? Right? We use this to understand the problem, but also we use this to design the solutions for those problems that we encounter. And we have many tools for that. They're not all on here. And some come from the software industry, and some come from the domain-driven design community, like event storming and domain storytelling. And some come from other industry, like we have a business model canvas that we use. So basically anything that makes it visual and you can have discussions around is a tool that you can use for collaborative modeling. So, okay. And, domain-driven design, we found this process. We will follow the process, and they thought, this will be easy peasy. We'll align a bit, right? We'll understand the business. We'll see what value they try to offer to the customers, who our customers are, what value can't we currently offer, because we're having problems. What actually are they asking for? We'll see what do we need to do, what's very important to do if we want to offer that value to our customer. We'll check a bit how we make money. So we'll align. And then we'll discover the domain. We'll use event storming for that. We'll dig a bit deeper. And we really don't want to make the same mistakes we did before. So we'll use example mapping to really dig into those business rules, because sometimes they're a bit vague, like we want optimized seating. I don't really know what that means. Hey, we'll just use example mapping to fix that. And then we'll decompose, once we have all that information, into clear boundaries. And of course, we're going to look on how you connect all of this together, because what we don't want to do is move the complexity of the boundaries to in the complexity of communicating between those boundaries. So we'll check that out for sure. Et voila, we will end up with a very well-designed software system. And we'll not do this long. We'll hire some people who already know how to do all of this. What could possibly go wrong here? Well, the answer is the people. That is what can go wrong here. Because, every person, we have our own personalities, we have our own communication styles, we have our own way of doing things, talking about things, we have our own experience that influence how we design things. And then, collaborative modeling, we put everyone in the same room, and we just have to figure it out. And as I said, I design socio-technical systems. And we talk about this in domain-driven design a lot, right? It's about the socio-technical system. But we don't really focus on the social part of that. Once in a while, we'll mention team sizes and how to organize around that. But that's sort of where we stop to do that. And collaborative modeling, most definitely, is a socio-technical happening, right, with all those people in the room. So we also need to look at the social challenges that brings with it. And I'm going to do that right now. We're going to do that together. So ranking. Who here has heard of ranking before? I know Kenny. All right, a few people. All right, so as humans, we have this very weird habit of putting people in a social hierarchy. And we create that hierarchy, and we actually give people an amount of power depending on where you are. And that is your rank. So we're ranking all the time. And we do this in two ways. We do this explicitly. We have a CEO, we have a CTO, we have an architect, we have a tech lead, we have a senior developer, we have a junior developer. And then we say, okay, this is sort of the power that you have because of that. And that's explicit ranking. But we also do that implicitly. And we do that with a set of properties that we don't really have consciously in our mind. But we compare ourselves and what we can do and who we are to all the other people in the room that we're collaborating with or that we're working with. And we sort of try to see how that social hierarchy would be and what type of power we assign to that. So implicit ranking is context dependent, and it's also subjective because it's you giving that other person their rank. And you can sort of visualize that with this really nice tool. And there are a couple of those properties set out. Like one of the things we look at is, your education. Do you have a bachelor? Do you have a master? Do you have a background at all in software development to begin with? The second thing we can look at is, what is the color of my skin? What is my gender? What is my religion? What is my native language? Because I am speaking English to you right now, but normally I speak Dutch. And for someone who speaks native English, things are just, a little bit easier than for someone who has to speak in a foreign language all the time, no matter how fluent we get. I think I'm pretty fluent in English by now, but still it's not the same thing. And that, sometimes gives me less power because I don't know how to express myself. And then my most favorite, or the magical powers that we give people, right? We talk about rock star developers. We talk about wanting ninjas and wizards. And I don't know how they do it, but, magic happens. And because of that, someone can have a higher or lower implicit rank inside your team, inside your company. So that is ranking, one of the social challenges. The next thing I want to talk about is conflict. And I'll get something to drink first. And when I say conflict, I know that a lot of people have this idea of slamming doors and yelling people at each other and things going very bad and storming off. But that is the end of a conflict. That's when it has already escalated out of control. So conflict has a beginning. And it begins very simple, which is different opinions of two or more people. And that is conflict. And that's nice. Like, have different opinions of many people here, probably. You might not even agree with what I say today, and that's great, and I would love to have a conversation about that, and that will be a conflict. But it will be at the beginning. And if we sort of don't resolve it, and if we don't respect each other, and if we don't try to understand the other person's opinion, if we don't really want to listen to them, we just want to convince them that our opinion is better, then conflict starts to escalate. And that's when you get the slamming of the doors and the yelling. So you have to, prevent that from happening when you're trying to redesign your system, right? You have to try to keep it at those early stages. Because, people don't like conflict. At least I don't like conflict. And we all have our sort of tics on how to deal with it. And I'm not particularly proud of mine, but I walk away physically. I walk away from the conflict. I will just walk out of the room. When it's remote, I'll turn off my camera. I'll close myself off of whatever is happening. But that's, how I deal with conflict. When it's escalated, I can manage the early stages. And I want to talk a bit about a specific form of conflict as well, which is resistance. And resistance happens when you don't feel heard or you don't feel valued. You sort of start to get a grudge. And it's not consciously, you don't consciously decide, I am going to resist now. That's not what you do. But it happens. And again, just as conflict, it escalates. And I want to talk about this situation I had a few jobs back. Our team lead wanted to have, clean up the code base a bit because we were all over the place, tabs, spaces, 2, 4, all that kind of stuff. And we all thought that was great. And he said, I want to use this formatter and I want to do it under the default settings. I was trying to, express that, hey, I don't quite like these default settings. And, he was sort of wiping everything off the table. And I started making jokes, right? Whenever he said something, I was like, as long as it is under your default settings, right? I started making jokes. And after a while, I started making excuses not to do that. I tried installing this formatter. It just didn't work. And I'm not lying. It didn't work, right? It failed. I also didn't put a lot of time in trying to see what was wrong with it. And then eventually, I just quit. I left the company. And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, Gien, you quit your job over a formatter? Like, no. I quit my job over not being heard again, over not being valued again, or being told or giving the impression that my opinion doesn't matter again, right? This was the last sort of drop, and I couldn't, couldn't take it anymore, because this is cultural. If you wipe opinions for something that small, then you're like, yeah, okay, you can deal with it. But if that happens over and over and over again, as I have seen happen in collaborative modeling sessions, by the way, like before that person even expresses their opinion, they're like, no, that won't work. We're not going to even talk about that. Then it escalates, and then people leave, or they go to war, right? And you get an us versus them inside your company, and that's not a fun situation to be in either. So that's resistance. And then the last thing I want to talk about, the social challenges that you'll encounter, is a polarity. And we are, all here because we love helping to solve problems. And but not all problems are solvable. Some issues have to be managed. For certain things, you have to find a balance, right? Like if we think about our software system, we have a whole and we have the parts. And we want to balance local complexity versus global complexity, right? So how big do we make our boundaries, and how much do those boundaries have to talk to each other? We want to balance that. So that's a polarity in your software system. And you have that too in collaborative modeling. One I have seen a lot is that, some people want to dive deep into understanding what the business is all about, right? They want to pick a very specific topic and they want to go deep. And other people want to have an understanding of the entire flow first. So like opposites almost of that. And I'm very much on I want to understand the entire picture first so I can hang up more knowledge and more knowledge and more knowledge and then dig deeper. It's not that I don't want to dig deep, it's just that I don't want to do that first. And if we think back about the ranking, and like if your team lead or your CTO is in your collaborative modeling sessions, or your business is there, and they prefer to dig deep, then depending on your rank, you'll actually fall into one of it. And you sort of have to, you have to manage that, because you have to make everyone in that room comfortable. Everyone has to be able to follow. And if you, need a bigger picture first, so you better understand the deep details, you kind of have to start finding a balance between those two. All right, so collaborative modeling is a socio-technical challenge. Redesigning is also that. And we don't really think about it all that much, or I feel. Because the technical choices that we make have social consequences, and the social choices that we make have technical consequences. And often I see software architects or team leads sort of making technical choices without thinking about, okay, what is the social impact of this? I'm going to give you a few examples. So let's start with technology. Depending on what we choose, we are creating a skill gap. So we had our event sourcing talks yesterday, and that's great, and Event Store is here, and it's an awesome product. So we're deciding to do event sourcing together with Event Store. But there's nobody on the team that knows how to do that. But the architect decided. It's like, no, I don't think that's what we need. I don't think event sourcing is what we need at all. And then it's pushed into production, and it doesn't work very well. And it's like, no, this Event Store thing just doesn't work. We need to replace it. We need to go back to the way it was. And that is because you haven't fixed the skill gap that your technical choice created. And a lot of companies, what they do is, hey, you just have to learn this. And by the way, please don't learn on the job. Do that after hours, because produce, produce, produce. And also, here is 500 euros to go to a conference. And that's how they want to fill that skill gap. And that's not enough. It's because we don't think about those social consequences. People are scared to ask for help sometimes. I am scared to ask for help sometimes. To say that I don't understand this, I have looked at this 5 times and I just can't wrap my head around event sourcing. Can someone please help me? It's not an easy thing to do. All right, test-driven design. And I know what you're thinking, again, like how does that have social consequences? But it does. So I worked in a company and we had 2 teams. Well, we have more than 2 teams, but I just want to talk about these 2 teams. And my team did test-driven development and the other team didn't. And the other team's software was, often on fire, right? They had to wake up in the middle of the night. They had to fix bugs. They had to push to production all the time. I mean, they're basically, had the hotfix line open all the time. But higher management was like, oh, wow, look at that team. Look how hard they are working. We should promote them. So their explicit ranking got higher because they didn't do this. And I'm not proud of it, but this feeling inside of me went like, why the hell should I keep doing this? I'm getting nothing out of this. They're not, they don't value me here. I should just stop doing test-driven development and let that part of the system burn as well. I don't really want to do that because I don't want to wake up at 1 a.m. But that was, that resistance kicking in. It's like, how is this possible? And I've also seen the other way around, where test-driven development is seen as this magical skill that a team has that other teams don't, and then they get rewarded. They're the hero team. They're doing the right job, and that's how you're supposed to do it, and they get the promotions. So it can go either way depending on the culture of your company. All right, so DDD, because that's why we're here. And we try to find bounded context. We try to find good boundaries when we're designing our system. But that changes teams. That's a social consequence. And not everyone wants the teams to change. Like maybe they're very happy in their team and they want to disrupt that. Or maybe in a past company, they had to swap teams every 5 minutes, right? Once they started feeling comfortable in the team and once they started, getting a good flow again, it's like, hey, we're going to change teams. So then when you're designing these things and taking things apart, they will say like, no, we should keep that together and just give that to our team. They're trying to keep that team together. And you can say, okay, that is a social consequence, and I do not want to have that social consequence. Like people don't want the teams to change. And that will influence your design decisions. And that's fine, right? Because it's balance. We have to do this. So whenever I go to my customer, I also ask this, like, how far can I go? Are you willing to change the teams? Because if you're not, I will design it differently than I would have if I have, if they say, here's carte blanche, go ahead, do whatever you want. Then I design it differently, right? So we work within the social constraints that we have, or we should do that. All right, and then a last example is the strategic classification. I kept it last because it's close to me, because I honestly don't really know how to fix it. Would love to have your input if you have an idea. Because strategic classification, right? Understanding what is core, what gives us a competitive advantage, what is very valuable within the system, and what is supporting and what is generic. I find that very useful information. But I have noticed there's this backlash that supporting and generic are considered unimportant. And even though I say this, like just because it's supporting or just because it's generic, it's not unimportant, right? You need the whole system to work or the system just doesn't work. I get this. And then what I see happening, and that's the sad part, is that you have people working on these generic things and there's a lot of bugs in their code, and it's because they don't get the same budget. So they don't have money to hire more developers, even though they need to do that. And people start to resist because that's what people do. And then they leave. And then we'll cut your budget some more. And they get into this situation of where their implicit ranking is really, really low. And I don't know what to do about that. And that's not what it was about. It was about getting information, valuable information, to make design choices. and the social consequences. I don't know how to deal with that. Because I keep saying this, it doesn't mean unimportant, and they just don't listen. So, we put all these people in the same room, all these things, the social dynamics and all of that, it starts to happen. And we don't do anything about it because we are humans. We're supposed to be good at humaning. And we're not. Well, we are, because being human is having conflict sometimes, and we do this implicit ranking, even though we don't really want to, but we do it. So, deal with it. You're supposed to be good at that. You're supposed to be good at communicating, right? It's a soft skill. And it's not. And so how can you make that better when you're doing collaborative modeling? And it's with a facilitator. So that is who we're going to call to make our life a little easier. And facilitator comes from the French to faciliter, and that means to render easy. So the job of a facilitator is to render things easier for people, right? To take that whole all those social challenges and make that easier for people so that we can focus on designing and that we can deal with all of that so we're not bothered by it. And facilitating is also something that you need to learn. It's a skill. And because you can learn it, it's not that much a job title as a role. Because even if you're an architect, or you're the team lead, or you're one of the developers, you can learn these skills and you can start to facilitate and make the collaborative modeling sessions go a bit smoother. And this is sort of my mental model on facilitating, right? So in the back, you have all those people doing collaborative modeling, and you have a facilitator, and we have a whole bunch of tools and techniques and skills for us that we can use. And we have to observe the collaborative modeling, but then we also have to sort of observe the undercurrent. And we refer to those as shadows. What happens in the shadows? And that's what, as facilitator, that's what you have to observe. So a facilitator also has roles. It is a role, and it also has roles. And one of those is observer. I remember that when I was learning to become a teacher, way back, before I became a software developer, and when we had an internship in a school, the first week, all we had to do is sit in the back of the classroom and observe. Right? We got these whole pages-long documents that I really didn't want to fill in. And we had to do that. And they were asking questions like, what is the teaching method? How is the teacher dealing with conflict? How are they dealing with difficult students? And how do the students respond to that? So all that we had to do was observe. And we kind of have to do the same thing as a facilitator. The only difference is that we can't, go sit in the back of the session. We have to be in there when we're doing that. And that's not easy. That's definitely not an easy thing to do. I want to zoom in on one specific heuristic, a guiding heuristic for observing, and it's by Weinberg. And he says that if words and music don't go together, look for the hidden element, look for the missing element. And I find that a very nice way of talking about this, that when your body language and the words that you're saying and of how you're behaving, when there's no match in that, then something is off. So if I say, I'm really happy to be speaking here at DDD Europe, or I say, I'm really happy to be speaking here at DDD Europe. Right? In the first one, I am really happy to be speaking at DDD Europe. In the first one, words and music match. There's no missing element. In the second one, it didn't. And that sort of has to be an aha moment. And you sort of have to try to find out, what is going on. Like one thing I have seen happening is, we have collaborative modeling sessions and everything is going really great. And then a session goes really bad. Like there's no result, there's no conversation, there's no discussion. And there's a lot of interrupting. Then it goes good again for a while and then it goes bad. And then I tried to find a pattern, what's going on here. And it turned out that every time it went bad, the CTO was in the room. And there you have that ranking again. So, the rank influences. People don't feel comfortable speaking up anymore when someone with a higher rank is in the sessions. And then, if it's just one person, you have to try to talk about this, right? So part of being a facilitator is sometimes being a coach or a counselor, and checking like, hey, what's going on here? How can I help? So as said, you have a role, and so you need skills to actually fulfill that role. And one are the observer skills, which I already spoke a bit about when you actually about the role. And the other thing you need is compassion, and that is empathy plus action. Because empathy alone, I feel, is not enough. And when I say empathy, I very much mean cognitive empathy and not emotional empathy. We don't always make that clear. We don't always make that distinction. That I don't have to feel what you feel to understand what you might be going through. I actually prefer not to feel what you feel when I'm trying to understand what you're going through. So we need compassion. And we do that by holding space. Like if we notice that those people are scared all of a sudden to speak up whenever the CTO is present, you observe the CTO, and when you notice he keeps interrupting, and you have to be kind of brave yourself for this. As an external consultant, that's often easier because I have a very different rank inside those sessions. I have a higher rank by default, so I can easily do that. But if you pick up the role of facilitator yourself, it's not that easy to do that. You need to say, hey, Mira, I understand, you have an opinion about this, but I would really like to hear what Laura has to say about that. So you have to hold the space for those people who are afraid to speak up just because the CTO is there. And that is compassion. And it's not an easy thing to do. And another thing you need to do is you need to stay neutral. Because you can't tell that CTO, it's kind of annoying, you're interrupting all the time. You can't do that because that's not neutral. Because that is also a person with their experience, with their perspectives, with their past, and you also have to deal with that. And if you worked in a company where the CTO interrupted you a lot, and then you go to facilitate in the other one, it's very easy to lose your neutrality when that happens. It might not even be a problem for the group, right? People just interrupt in that company, that's what happens, and there's no problem then. But you'll jump on it, you'll judge that harder because you have had that past experience. So, a facilitator is a human too, and you also have the conflict, and you also have the rank, and you also have your communication style and all of that. But you should try to sort of, pass no judgment, stay neutral as best as you can, and you will fail when you try to do that. I failed when I tried to do that, and that's okay. So I know what I'm not going to say I know what you're thinking again, because I don't really know what you're thinking at this moment, and I have said it twice before. It's saying like, I don't want to say that collaborative modeling doesn't work, right? I don't want to say that these social challenges are too difficult to make it work. But we need to take them into account. I want to go back to the beginning where I said, we design systems, because that's what we're trying to do. And I've only been talking about the social aspect. And what we want is to make design decisions that are sustainable. We do want that, ta-da, we want the good software. or we want to make software that's a little bit better than it was a year ago, at the very least. And you need sustainability to do that. And with sustainability, I don't mean, the ecological aspect of it. I don't mean ecological. I mean that we want consistency and clarity in our design, but also in our design decisions. How do we reach that design? We also want to be consistent in that, and we want to understand what's going on. So that is sustainability for me. And sorry, I'm going to talk about consistency for a bit. And this is a model of decision that I want to use when I'm explaining consistency and clarity to you. So what you have are alternatives, right? There are many options, we have choices, we generate different designs, and those are our alternatives. And we also have information, from the business, from the technical, we have all this information coming in. And we also have preference, there are things that we would rather be doing. I do want to work in an event-sourced system. I want that. And all of that, goes into a process. So a decision here is a process. It's not this single point thing, then no return, but it's the process of reaching a conclusion. That is a decision for me. And out of that process is a course of action, right? We'll do this first, then we'll do this, then we'll do this, then we'll do that. And eventually we will have done that. So information, right? We use collaborative modeling to get that information. And we also use collaborative modeling to design those alternatives. And this is something I don't see happening often at companies. It's like, oh, we found a solution, and then they move on. And they don't look at all the other options, and they're there, right? I wanted to be able, we always say there's a trade-off in everything, but we really don't generate options to actually be able to see all the trade-offs that clear. And we also have a preference, right? I am going to talk about sustainability in the ecological sense for a second, but say that your company values that very much. So that will actually influence the alternative that you choose, right? So you have a preference over the options, and that will influence how you think about it. Say that, you worked with microservices in the past and it has gone horribly wrong, and you don't want to do that again. That will influence your preference on all those alternatives. And we have to make that clear when we're redesigning the system, right? We have to understand what's actually underneath someone's preference. Like, why are you preferring this option? What's going on there? Because sometimes we don't see like a good reason, but then there is an emotional reason or a value that pushes them in that direction, and it's good to understand that. So, and then we analyze our options. That's sort of what happens. And this is a visualization tool that I like to use when I'm sort of comparing alternatives. It's called a pro-con fix list. It's quite simple. I know there are other ways to analyze and other models that actually do that, but this is an easy way in, and I want to have that discussion about what trade-offs are we actually getting here. So we have, all the positive things that we will get from an option. We have all the negative things that we will get from an option. And then I go one step further, and I look at fixes. And they're the purple ones next to the cons. We are in the Netherlands and people love to bike. So imagine that one of the options is to bike to the conference. And it has been nice weather and that's great. But one of the downsides is that it could rain. When you're trying to make this decision, like it could rain. And I'll arrive sweaty. That's not fun either. But what you can do is you can put fresh clothes in your backpack so that you can change when you arrive. And you'll still arrive sweaty, and it's still not fun that you get wet when it rains. At least I don't enjoy getting wet when it rains. But there's a fix, and it doesn't weigh that much anymore into your decision making, or which option you actually prefer, because you found a little fix that kind of neutralizes it a bit. And that's why I really like this, because we don't think about that fix at all. All right. And we have made a decision and we implement it, and then we have an outcome. Because in a decision, right, it's that process, and then we have our course of action, and then eventually we have an outcome, right, because we have a plan and we implement that plan. And things don't always go as we hoped or predicted that they would go. So the outcome is not always what we expected. So we can't just blindly follow whatever you have decided either. And the reason you can't do that is because of uncertainty. If we had 100% information that goes into the process, there would be no uncertainty. But we can't have 100%. We have less. We don't really know how much we have, because you have that, unknowns. And while you're implementing, things just pop out. And your course of action might not be good anymore. You have to go back. You have to reanalyze. And sometimes you say, hey, that was a very bad decision, going for a monolith. It was very bad. It's a big ball of mud. Well, that's we didn't decide we're going to create a big ball of mud. That's not what we did. We said we're going to create a monolith. Just somewhere along the way, it went wrong. So the quality of your decision, right, in the context of everything you had, we picked a monolith, and the quality of the outcome, which is we have this big ball of mud now, are not the same thing. So you have to make that distinction. And I couldn't find, there was no word for that in any of the decision-making books that I read. But then I wrote a book about poker, playing poker, and they call that resulting. And resulting means confusing the quality of your decision with the quality of your outcome. And if you want consistency, you have to be able to separate that. And if you don't want a bad outcome, you have to create feedback loops into your implementation process so that you can go back to your decision process when needed and adjust and reevaluate to go forward again. So those gray arrows, which big screen kind of ignored in my setup story, are actually very, very, very important if you want to make good design decisions, which will lead to good design. And then I said, we also care about clarity. So we want to care about the real socio-technical impact that we have during our collaborative modeling, but also about decisions. We have to talk about decisions. Like, who can decide what? We don't talk about this, right? We want team autonomy. We want teams to be autonomous, but we don't really say what they can decide. We want to collaborate with the business, but we don't really say what they can decide. And you're an architect, and nobody tells you, what you really can decide, or what should be decided by the software teams, or how far you can go. So you need to create clarity on that, right? And you also need to create clarity on how things are decided. Like, just who can decide and how are we going to decide? So you can do democratic or you can do autocratic, and those are polarities. And then you have everything in between. So democratic is an idea. I want to redesign the system. Let's go. Like, there's nothing there. That's an idea. Then you have a suggestion. And that's, I want to redesign the system. I want to use microservices. What do you think? It's still very open and for change. And then you can make a proposal, which is already more towards autocratic. Like, we're going for microservices. This is what it's going to look. This is what it's going to look like. Can you find any fault? Right? Then it's about discovering, reasoning flaws or things they hadn't thought of. And if you don't find those, then that's what we're going to do, right? So you still have a bit of input, but it's very limited. And then you have a command, which is, this is what we're going to do. no question. What does it take for you to come along? Like, that social aspect, that emotional aspect. Well, I worked in microservices before and it didn't go that well, because we created very small boundaries and, we had a lot of global complexity. And then you can have a discussion about that, look, this is it. And I want to go back to that story where I quit over a formatter. And one of the reasons that I started to resist is because we were giving a suggestion, right? It was formulated as a suggestion. It turned out it was a command. Like, the lead didn't want endless discussions about which settings we should have. So he just wanted to go for the default settings. And I can understand that. But he made it sound like there was room for negotiation when there wasn't. And then, you don't feel heard because for him it was decided. He didn't need to listen to me. It had been decided. But he didn't, make it sound like a command. And that would have been very different. So, before you do this, really think about how are we going to decide it. And when it is a command, make it very clear that it is a command. We need clarity on how we're going to make the decision if we want sustainability. And then, over time, when we have that clarity, right, and we have that consistency, right, that process of making design decisions, and we sort of figured out who can decide what and what the boundaries are on that, then we'll start making decisions in a similar way. And a facilitator can actually help with getting you that clarity and that consistency. It's part of the job. As I said, I always ask, can I change the teams? Do you want to stay in the same teams? I'm creating clarity. And I don't do this, somewhere in an email to the CTO. I do this in the entire group so that we can have a discussion about it so that everyone is on the same page. And that is when your decisions become sustainable, because you can keep doing that for a very long time and have better and better outcomes, right? Like what you planned will start to match up with what actually happens because you have sustainability in your design decisions. All right. So I spoke about a lot. I briefly mentioned what collaborative modeling is. And I also said you have social challenges. When you do that, you have conflict, you have ranking, you have resistance, you have polarities. I didn't mention cognitive biases, but they're like just one topic for an entire talk. But they're also great to look into. And I said that, a facilitator can help you with all of that. And you need certain skills to do that. But in the end, you can learn those skills. So you can manage all those social aspects of a socio-technical system. And we do that because we want sustainable decision-making. All right. So one more thing. I'm together with Kenny and Evelyn. Kenny is over there. Wave. We are writing about this because we do feel that that social aspect is ignored, and it's ignored a lot. So we decided, you know what, we're going to spend 1.5 years of our lives actually writing it all down on how to do this, so it doesn't get ignored anymore. And in your goodie bags, which you can pick up tonight or tomorrow night, there's a booklet. So the book is still in draft. But we decided to give 2 of our chapters away for free at DDD Europe, so that you can sort of understand a bit better what the book is about. And inside you also have a discount code, which is valid until the 5th of July, I believe. So if you want to know more about sustainable design decisions and how to get there, then you can read the book, or you can, come and talk to Kenny and me here at the conference. Thank you very much.